The fluorescent lights of Miller's gas buzzed incessantly above my head as I counted the register for the third time that night. It was 2:47 a.m., and I was halfway through another graveyard shift at this decrepit station just off Route 16. The place had seen better days: yellowed linoleum floors, flickering lights, and an ancient coffee machine that produced what could generously be called brown water. But it paid the bills, and night shifts usually meant peace and quiet. I glanced up at the security monitors mounted behind the counter. 4 grainy screens showed different angles of the empty lot: the fuel pumps, the side entrance, the back lot, and the store interior. The cameras were old, but they made me feel less alone during these long nights. Sometimes I'd catch movement on the screens and feel my heart skip, only to realize it was just a plastic bag dancing in the wind, or a stray cat prowling around the dumpsters. That's when I saw the headlights pierce through the fog. An old pickup truck, its rust-eaten body barely visible in the mist, pulled up to pump number 3. I straightened my name tag and waited for the customer to come in, but nobody did. The truck just sat there, engine idling, headlights burning through the darkness. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The hair on the back of my neck started to rise. I was about to use the intercom when the lights flickered and died, plunging the store into darkness. The emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. The security monitors went black, then static, then black again. My hand instinctively reached for my phone, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. We barely got 1 bar out here on good days. That's when I heard it, a soft thud from the bathroom at the back of the store. The door was slightly ajar, even though I distinctly remembered locking it during my rounds an hour ago. A thin stream of water was seeping out from underneath, spreading across the linoleum like dark tendrils. My throat went dry. Protocol said I should check it out, but every instinct screamed at me to stay behind the counter. The ancient landline on the counter started ringing. Nobody ever called the store line except my manager, and he was on vacation in Florida. I picked up the receiver with trembling fingers. Static crackled through the line, then a voice, distorted and distant, spoke 3 words that made my blood run cold. "He's behind you." I spun around, nothing but shelves of chips and cigarettes. When I turned back to the phone, the line was dead. The security monitors suddenly came back to life, but something was wrong with the footage. The timestamps all read 3:33 a.m., even though my phone showed 2:55. The images were distorted, full of static and digital artifacts. As I squinted at the screens, my heart stopped. There, in the grainy footage of aisle 3, stood a dark figure. It was perfectly still, facing the camera. But when I looked down that same aisle in the store, there was nobody there. The receipt printer started running on its own, spooling out an endless stream of paper. Instead of the usual transaction details, it was printing strings of numbers and symbols I didn't recognize. The paper kept coming, piling up on the counter like some kind of twisted serpent. I tried to turn it off, but the power button did nothing. The numbers seemed familiar somehow, and with growing horror, I realized why. They were dates. Dates of missing persons cases I'd read about in the local paper over the past year. A movement on the monitors caught my eye. The truck's driver's door was open now, swinging gently in the wind. The fuel nozzle lay on the ground, gas pooling around it, but there was still no sign of the driver. I reached for the emergency shut-off button, but before I could press it, all the monitors went black except one. The bathroom camera was still working, and what I saw made me forget how to breathe. The bathroom mirror was covered in handprints, bloody ones, forming a pattern that looked almost like words. The sink was overflowing, dark water cascading onto the floor, and in the corner, barely visible in the frame, was a pile of something that looked like wet clothing. But as I stared at the screen, the pile moved. It was then that I noticed the smell, a thick metallic odor seeping under the counter. My eyes followed a trail of wet footprints that I hadn't noticed before. They led from the bathroom toward the counter, toward me. But these weren't normal footprints. They were distorted, too large, and there were too many of them, overlapping and crisscrossing like some bizarre dance pattern. The newest ones were still forming, water spreading out in the shape of feet, getting closer, getting fresher. They found me the next morning, huddled behind the counter, clutching my phone with its unsent 911 call still on the screen. The police said I was lucky, the sixth person to work the night shift at Miller's Gas in the past year, but the first to survive. They found evidence of someone living in the crawl space above the bathroom, watching through holes in the ceiling panels, planning their moves for weeks. The wet footprints came from the leaking pipes they had deliberately damaged. The truck was stolen, reported missing 2 states over. They never caught whoever it was. The cameras had been hacked, the phone lines tampered with. The receipt printers' strange numbers. A sick game, playing out the dates of their previous victims. Sometimes I still dream about those wet footprints forming on the linoleum, about the pile of clothes that moved in the bathroom. But what haunts me most is knowing that someone was up there all along, watching us, night after night, choosing their moments, waiting for the perfect time to come down. I quit the next day. Miller's Gas is still open, still advertising for night shift workers. The pay is better now, and they've installed new cameras. But sometimes when I drive past late at night, I see those fluorescent lights flickering through the fog, and I wonder about the person behind the counter. I wonder if they've noticed the ceiling tiles moving yet. I wonder if they've started counting the footprints. The snowstorm had been raging for hours when I started my shift at the 24-hour quick stop. Being the only gas station for 50 miles along this stretch of highway made us essential, storm or not. The calendar on the wall marked December 15th, peak winter season in northern Montana. I watched the snow pile up against the windows as I settled in behind the counter for another 12-hour night shift. The first sign something was wrong came when our digital price display started glitching. The numbers flickered erratically, casting an intermittent red glow across the empty parking lot. I made a note to tell maintenance in the morning, though with the storm, I doubted anyone would come. That's when I noticed the tire tracks in the fresh snow. They led behind the building, but there was no car in sight. I checked the security feed for the back lot. The loading area was covered in undisturbed snow, except for a section of chain-link fence that had been cut open. The cut looked fresh. The metal edges still gleamed in the camera's infrared light. My hand instinctively moved to the panic button under the counter, but I stopped myself. False alarms meant immediate termination, and I needed this job. The emergency supplies aisle caught my attention. Someone had been through it recently. Road flares were scattered on the floor, and several emergency kits were missing from the shelves. We'd stocked them just yesterday. I knew because I'd done the inventory myself. The security cameras had been down for maintenance during the day shift. Convenient timing, looking back on it now. The storage room door was ajar, spilling light onto the shop floor. We kept animal feed back there for the local farmers, hundreds of pounds of grain and corn in heavy bags. As I approached, I could see several bags had been torn open, their contents spilled across the concrete floor. The tears looked like claw marks, but too big for any local wildlife I knew of. The satellite phone, our emergency link to the outside world, was dead. The cord had been cut clean through, and frost was already forming on its dark screen. My cell phone showed no service, as usual. But before the satellite phone died, it had received one last emergency broadcast. I pulled up the message history. Attention, all residents. Secure all food sources. Do not approach. A noise from outside made me freeze. Something was walking through the snow toward the entrance. The tracks it left were like nothing I'd ever seen. Massive paw prints, but the gait was all wrong. Almost bipedal. Drops of dark liquid stained the snow between the prints. Not engine oil. This was too red, too fresh. The next few minutes were a blur of motion and sound. Security shutters were supposed to deploy in emergencies, but nothing happened when I hit the button. Something big moved through the aisles, toppling shelves. All the dried meat and jerky products were torn open, scattered. The smell of blood and wet fur filled the store. I stayed frozen behind the counter, watching through the security mirrors mounted in the corners. It went for the freezer section next. The steel doors held for a moment before buckling inward with a screech. Frozen meat packages exploded across the floor. In the warped reflection of the damaged freezer door, I caught a glimpse of matted fur, of something that shouldn't exist. Something that walked on two legs but moved like a predator. The radio scanner I kept under the counter crackled to life. Through the static, I caught fragments of police chatter. Specimen escaped, containment breach, shoot on sight, extreme caution. Then a different voice cut through, clearer than the rest. Subject is result of experimental gene therapy. Highly aggressive, drawn to food sources. Something slammed against the loading dock door, leaving massive dents in the metal. The impacts came faster, more desperate. Whatever was out there, it was trying to get to the storeroom, to the tons of grain and feed we had stockpiled. The door wouldn't hold much longer. I had to make a choice, stay hidden or run for my truck through the blizzard. The garage bay offered my only chance. We used it for basic car repairs during the day shift. The chain that usually secured it was hanging broken. This must have been how it got in originally. If I could get to my truck, I might have a chance. The snow would cover my tracks, but I'd have to cross 30 feet of open space, and I knew it could smell me. That's when I noticed the other vehicles on the security feed. 3 cars and a semi-truck, partially buried in snow. They hadn't been there earlier. Their doors were open, some torn off completely. Dark stains surrounded each vehicle. The realization hit me. I wasn't its first visit of the night. The gas station was just its latest stop. Papers scattered near one of the abandoned cars caught my attention on the monitor. They'd been protected from the snow by the vehicle's frame. Even through the grainy footage, I could make out official letterheads, complex diagrams of DNA structures, and multiple classified stamps. One phrase stood out: Project Apex, Ursine Enhancement Initiative. The truth about that night came out in pieces over the following months. A secret military research facility in the mountains, experimental attempts to create enhanced soldiers using animal DNA. The storm had provided the perfect cover for a specimen to escape. They found what was left of the retrieval team scattered across 3 counties, but they never found it. The quick stop was rebuilt with reinforced steel doors and military-grade security systems. The official story blamed a grizzly bear driven crazy by hunger, but I know what I saw in those security mirrors. Sometimes, on snowy nights when I drive past, I still see massive tracks leading into the wilderness. And I wonder if somewhere out there, in the vast Montana wilderness, it's still evolving, still hunting, still growing stronger. The old CB radio crackled as another trucker called in their location. Working nights at Pete's Gas and Go in the Nevada desert meant I was often the only point of contact for drivers crossing this desolate stretch of highway. The massive antenna on our roof, installed back in the 70s, picked up signals from hundreds of miles away. Tonight, the static-filled chatter was my only companion as a massive dust storm approached from the east. Our dispatch station was ancient but reliable, a wall of radio equipment that looked like it belonged in a Cold War bunker. Most gas stations had abandoned their CB setups years ago, but Pete insisted on keeping ours running. These truckers depend on us, he'd say. Sometimes we're the only ones listening. Tonight, that thought felt more ominous than comforting. I'd been logging the usual traffic, mostly long-haul truckers and the occasional lost tourist, when I noticed something odd about the missing persons wall behind the dispatch desk. Nearly every case over the past year had one detail in common. The last known contact was a CB radio transmission somewhere along this stretch of highway. The pattern jumped out as I flipped through the logbooks. Every disappearance had been preceded by a call about engine trouble. The victims would request coordinates for the nearest service station. But according to the logs, no one ever made it to their reported destinations. The highway patrol had investigated, but the desert had a way of keeping its secrets. Channel 19, the main trucker frequency, suddenly went quiet. No static, no chatter, just dead air. One by one, other channels fell silent too. My eyes fell on the frequency chart pinned above the radio stack. Something about the numbers caught my attention. The highlighted frequencies, when plotted on the highway map, formed a pattern around our location. The tracking software we used to monitor truckers' locations was going haywire. Dozens of GPS signals were converging on a single point several miles east of the station. That shouldn't have been possible. There was nothing out there except sand and scrub brush. Yet every active transponder in range was being drawn to those coordinates. The dust storm was getting closer, but something about it looked wrong on the security cameras. The way it moved was too precise, too controlled. I switched the cameras to infrared mode and felt my blood run cold. Within the swirling sand, I could make out shapes, dozens of them, moving in formation. The ancient telegraph machine in the corner, a relic Pete kept for decoration, suddenly sprang to life. It began printing a series of coordinates, over and over. With shaking hands, I plotted them on the map. They formed a spiral pattern, with our gas station at the center. Each point corresponded to a location where a vehicle had been reported abandoned over the past year. The security monitors began failing one by one, each consumed by waves of static before going dark. The last working screen showed something that made no sense, a convoy of vehicles emerging from the dust storm. But they were all familiar. A blue semi reported missing in March, a white van that disappeared in June, every vehicle that had vanished from our stretch of highway. A truck's horn blared outside, impossibly loud. I recognized it, a distinctive double tone belonging to the first disappearance I'd logged after starting this job. Through the windows, I could see dashboard lights in the storm, dozens of them, all vehicles facing the station, every odometer spinning backward, counting down to something. That's when I discovered the modifications to our radio tower. Hidden beneath panels in the base were complex electronic components I'd never seen before. Our broadcast equipment hadn't just been maintained over the years, it had been converted into something else entirely. Every trucker's call we'd logged, every GPS signal we'd tracked, had been feeding into this system. The truth was in Pete's filing cabinet. Classified documents detailing Project Echo, a Cold War experiment in long-range mind control using CB radio frequencies. The gas station had been a front, the perfect cover for monitoring an isolated stretch of highway. Pete wasn't just the owner, he'd been the project's chief engineer. But something had gone wrong with the system. An ancient computer terminal hidden under the dispatch desk was still running the original program. Lines of code scrolled past. Signal amplification, 400% above threshold. Consciousness migration protocols enabled. Emergency shutdown failed. The system hadn't been controlling minds. It had been collecting them. Scattered across Pete's desk were photographs spanning decades. The same vehicles appeared in the background of each one, unchanging, like ghosts caught on film. He'd been drawing them back over and over, adding to the collection. The disappearances weren't failures of the system. They were its purpose. The CB radio burst to life with voices, hundreds of them, overlapping, speaking in unison. Every missing person, every vanished driver had been stored in the system's memory. Now the dust storm was acting as a massive antenna, broadcasting them back into their vehicles. But they weren't the same. The signals had changed them into something else. They found me barricaded in the garage the next morning. The official report blamed mass hysteria caused by the dust storm. They demolished the radio tower and closed the gas station. But the truckers who pass through here know better. They switch off their radios and drive faster. Because sometimes on the quietest nights, you can still tune to the dead channels and hear them talking, giving coordinates, reporting engine trouble, endlessly drawing others to join their convoy.